Hello, we're here today with Kiran Bedi. Kiran has been a police officer all her life, and after leaving the police, she is an advocate for police reforms. She's part of the Model Police Act Drafting Committee, and she speaks all over the country about reform. Today we have her with us at CHRI to talk about her opinion of where police reforms are going and how it can be done better. We know what's wrong with policing, so it really doesn't have to be rehearsed so much. But if you were prioritizing what's wrong with policing, where would you go? What would you say?
Where did I see a decline? Because I have seen two portions of policing. When I joined the service in 1972, things were pretty good till 1975. I saw some good policing for the first 3 years of my career. And I then started to see a decline and breaking down of institutions after 1975. And till 1975, like for instance, I belonged to the Delhi police. It had one of the finest leadership. You had Mr. P.R. Rajgopal, and he was from Delhi. Delhi as a cadre did not have its own police officer from the Delhi cadre because Union Territory was still growing. And we had this from Madhya Pradesh police. But one of the finest police officer one could have ever got. 8 a.m. he was in the police stations, 8 a.m. and calling us probationers to sit with him on the same broken down chairs and work at the FIR level. So there was no political interference. I saw upright senior leadership, and I was trained by that upright senior police leadership. And I also saw nobody meddling with us. I did not see any meddling because I had become a field officer also at that time, and there was nothing but do your best. However, resources were a big constraint, right? But everything else was in place and systems were in place. There was a culture of missionary zeal. There was a culture of serving the poor. There was a culture of tremendous hard work, etc., etc. Now, I saw huge decline all these years till 2010. Since 1975, 2010, I have only seen a decline and a decay in both the areas. And in between the police leadership and political leadership, Maya, we forget there's a whole bureaucracy of the administrative services. It's not just the IAS, it's administrative services. There's a bureaucracy. And that too has shown a huge decline.
Why could Mr. Rajgopal never be interfered with? But now it seems to be a given that the leadership, the political leadership, will tell every policeman what to do and they will bow down and do it.
Maybe because a person like Mr. Rajgopal did not have anything to ask for more. Today there's so many crumbs to ask for more. There are tribunals, there are commissions, and there are many of the positions you can ask for. So you need to hang on to the government house, you need to hang on to the privileges that come with it. Perhaps that gentleman or that kind of category did not have anything to ask for more. The kind of political leadership which started to come at the helm also showed a decline. So there is an Indian policing before 75 and after 75. Delhi started to get a lot of gundas and ruffians. I saw them. They were those who would go down, break down, break the law and hit the police and abuse the police. Were the ones who were now coming at the helm. I saw it with my own eyes. Youngsters who were lawbreakers. They were not law respecters. They were lawbreakers, and that's when the decisions start to come, when they had a darbar of their own, and the darbar now was selecting who would succeed Rajgopal. You can't believe it. There was a chain waiting there to say, can be there. And do you know what? That's the first time in my life I also got sidetracked. I was due for a field assignment. I wasn't given because somebody else went saying, can I get it? And I said, all right, you get it, because this is not the way I wanted. I saw this happening.
We're always blaming the politician regards this whole interference. But don't you think the police are an equal partner in this? Because it's almost hiding their own inefficiencies or bringing out their not being able to do their job properly, and that therefore having to resort to bowing down to this political interference.
I don't think so. It's not a question of putting the blame on somebody else. I said, for me, all three are equally accountable and responsible for the decay. The political leadership, the bureaucratic leadership between the politician and the police leader himself or herself. All three are equally responsible. But who's the most powerful out of these three? Who finally decides? Who finally approves? Who's got the final authority to transfer and appoint? The politician. That's why. Because the postings and transfers are political. And the bureaucrat plays a very vital role in putting up the note to the police, to the politician. So he plays a very big background role. So the politicians of courage alone can dare to overrule the bureaucrat. So he plays the invisible destructive hand or a constructive hand. He plays both kinds. You also have constructive hands, but you have also destructive hands. So he analyzes the whole appointment panel in such a way that he either destroys you, or he constructs you, or he reconstructs you, or even reinvents you, or even searches you, because if he wants somebody else, right or wrong. But the file goes through the Home Secretary's office. So what does the Home Secretary do? If he makes the right choice, you get a right person. The senior police officer doesn't decide his transfer and posting. So if you pick the right one, then comes the next stage. Do you give him a fixed tenure? You see, again, the appointment is till further orders. It does not say how long you're going to last. So whose fault is that?
So the issue is of unfettered discretion. That is one part of it. But the other part of it is that if you leave decision making to patronage, unfettered discretion, whims and fancies, you weaken the implementer, certainly, but at the same time, because the implementer and the policymaker are connected now to each other, you also obfuscate responsibility. So you can't get the police to be accountable. There is definitely a need for reform. So the need for reform seems to stem from dissatisfaction by the public of the way the police are, their underperformance, as well as their malpractice, which now is of rampant proportions.
Just acknowledging everything that we've been talking about right now, the Supreme Court in 2006 gave its judgment in the Prakash Singh case. In this, it laid down, basically set up three bodies that would address this issue of the political interference and the lack of accountability, and also give tenure. But CHRI has been monitoring the compliance of how states are following. The good part of that judgment was that it said that these directives are binding and all states have to follow. We've been monitoring for the last 4 years, and we almost find that no states are complying. And if they're doing it in a way which is subverting everything that the Supreme Court has laid down. What is your opinion on the judgment and how states are following?
First of all, you've gone back to Supreme Court judgment, first of its kind on police reform for this country, which was given in September 2006, right? First of all, that judgment itself came after more than 10 years. So thank you, Apex Court, for sitting on the judgment for so long. That means even the courts did not consider this as a priority. Since then, January 2007, 2010, I think the ball is still in the court of the Supreme Court. First it takes 10 years, then it now takes another 4 years. It appoints another committee to say take another 4 years. I don't see this happening at all. That means even the law courts do not want police reforms, or they're not serious about police reform, when they know that a very integral part of criminal justice or rule of law is this segment of police, right? So it's very good for courts also to keep beating the police, but it doesn't realize it's already a dead horse. You have passed a judgment and you're still sitting on it. Doesn't it anger the Supreme Court that its own judgment is being diluted? Can't it hold any one state in contempt? A, for doing nothing. Secondly, for violating its directions. I'd want to see single action in this. And that not that the matter is not in its knowledge. Every time it condemns the police, doesn't it also see why action is not being taken on its own judgment? Doesn't it feel its own authority diluted?
Kiran, do you think setting up the monitoring committee to look at states' compliance was, one, a good thing? And how do you think the monitoring committee has performed?
Well, perhaps Supreme Court needed a monitoring committee. It needed it. But it didn't need it to go on and on. It could have taken it to task, given it a year, whatever you do, come back to us, period. But it's gone on and on and on. Now, I think that's another area where again, if it had angered the apex court, it could have said enough is enough. Now we're taking up contempt, whoever hasn't implemented, we're taking it up, or we're issuing direct notices to these people that you come up with, show us in what way are you implementing the key directions. This judgment of the September 2006 is valid only till the state passes its own law. So they could get away with it, saying we passed our own law and now this is our constitution. Still, it is the committee which could have done the right move to say yes, they made their own law, but it's retrograde. So even if the committee, the leadership of the committee and the members of the committee are all very well meaning, but I think it hasn't delivered at all. It's been such a big disappointment.
I think the mandate of the committee was quite clear. I mean, it had few terms of reference, and one of the mandate was very clear, which said that it will look at the ground level compliance. Because even when the states are complying, it is mere compliance on paper. In practice, it is actually doing something completely different. It says it's setting up a state security commission, but 2 years down the line, there is no state security commission that has actually been set up. Who are the members? Or they've not had any meetings and they don't have any minutes of those meetings.
The patience of the court has been far too lengthy.
Yes.
And as a result, the signal that seems to go out is that eventually the court will not do very much, and so we can carry on as usual. And one of the real downsides has been the kind of really bad legislation that has been done by certain states just to get out from under the court.
Right.
But the committee itself has found itself very isolated because there has been an extreme amount of lack of cooperation. And it's not the kind of lack of cooperation that you can immediately point a finger or hold somebody's collar and say, why aren't you cooperating? It's sending a letter after 6 months saying, we have complied. Then another letter goes out saying, but what have you complied with? And then they answer saying, well, we've complied with Direction 1 and Direction 7, but not with Direction 6. You know, it's an absurd, clerical, bureaucratic means of battling or resisting through attrition. I think they've taken the temptation or given into the temptation of mediating rather than just replying or saying, we have seen it's not working and you've got to do something about it.
Coming back to the judgment, if we discuss the directives, the State Security Commission, for instance, the Supreme Court laid down that it follows either the Sorabji model or the NHRC model or the Ribeiro model. But what states are doing is it's trying to dilute those models. Basically, the body was to stop that political interference in policing.
See, the value of the State Security Commission lies in what the Supreme Court said it was supposed to do. It was supposed to ensure that no unwarranted influence or pressure would be brought to bear on the police.
Correct.
It was supposed to lay down the broad policy guidelines.
Correct.
And it was supposed to always ensure that the orders, etc., that were given were always according to the law.
Yes.
So it was supposed to be, they called it that, they called it a watchdog body. And they said in order for it to be valuable to the citizen,
Yes.
it must have, quite rightly, the Chief Minister or the Home Minister as its head, but also, which was, I think, a very radical idea, the leader of the opposition.
Correct.
So that policing then becomes not a partisan matter but a bipartisan or a multi-partisan matter. And to augment their wisdom and the need for proper policing, there were supposed to be 5 independent members.
Do you think that the State Security Commission can do that role if the model and if the composition is all right?
The two key players who will set this up and implement this judgment is the political leadership and the bureaucratic leadership. And as I told you, both will not be interested because both lose raw power. Raw power over police. over appointments, over plans, over perspectives, over its day-to-day running, over its budgeting, right? And so over its own placements, over patronage.
I think an interesting example would be that of Karnataka. It's also quite a funny example. The model they had formed was the three options that were suggested. They had picked two members from each of the three options, saying that they felt that that was the best option. So as a result, they left out the judicial component, they left out the individual or independent members, and they left out the opposition member. So in their sense, that was the best model,
Yeah.
but actually it was a model which was not going to work at all. So before the body could even be set up, they had killed it.
There's nobody to speak up for police reforms in this country. That's the tragedy. Everybody can only talk ill of it, but nobody is catching the bull by the horns, say enough is enough. I've had my own present, but I have my future because my children, I want the right policing. Nobody's saying that today. I would think this country would be a different country with just 30 Director Generals of Police. 30 at a time to say enough is enough, this country has to be ruled by law. We are ready to move anywhere and get transferred. India is a great country, anywhere is great because there's enough poor to serve, enough rule of law to be upheld. I think all you need is 30. Even if not 30, you need even one to lead the state. India would be a different country.
It seems to me that surely there is very little to be lost by the leadership for looking after its men. There are two things which are paradoxical. One is they don't look after their men, it seems to me, because I cannot see why there should be the constabulary living in such poor conditions, working such hours, being so short-staffed, being so badly deployed, having no pride in their work, on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a conspiracy of silence or of brotherhood of not allowing people to be punished, whether it is for the smallest thing or the greatest thing. Until now, we are breathless at the huge amount of murder, rape, extortion, atrocity, not once but 5, 6, 7 times being protected. How do you account for this?
Understand, true leadership true leadership takes full responsibility. But that person has to be committed and grow from within and not fostered from the top. Right? So really meritorious meant courage all the way up. And courage is showing courage in Indian police service is a huge threat to the whole power structure. So finally, by the time you've reached the top, you're weak-kneed, you're distant, you're not involved, you're not committed, you are not accessible. Because there's so many skeletons in the cupboard of so many others that you're there as protector of those skeletons. Not there to pull them out of the cupboard. If you are known to be pulling them out of the cupboard, you won't even be posted. You won't be there. So that means you have to distance. Even if you love your men, even if you want to be, you know what's not right, even if you want to be very careful with this, want to serve and work on welfare, and you know what's needed, you will not have the courage to question. Otherwise you'll go. You'll go like this. So you are not representing your men, you're representing the secretariat. And therefore what happens, that the constabulary also knows that they're leaderless. When nobody's speaking up for us to get better pay scales, get better housing, see personnel policies, human resource management, better training, better weaponry. So let's do what we can do and get away with it as long as we can.
Kiran, the things that you have just said would make a lay person imagine that actually there is no law governing policing, because genuine policing must always be lawful. With all this glamorization of extrajudicial killings or encounters, fake encounters, etc., to my mind these are all different ways of saying murder. You're murdering someone where you have no justification. So as a policewoman, have you ever felt that it's justifiable, any of these things?
See, policing is all lawful. You just have to have the courage to speak up for the law. You have the power to say no. If there is any illegal interference, You can put your foot down saying, I don't accept interference. You can even record that interference. And you can even register a case of interference because it's called obstruction in doing your public duty. Do you know, if I get a wrong recommendation, I can register an FIR and book that person. But I have to have the courage.
Yeah.
I think the real thing is courage. That's the point. Is from the training point of view, when you start losing courage over a period, then you are amenable to all kinds of infections.
The third thing, besides the State Security Commission and the Police Establishment Board, that the Supreme Court set up, besides the tenure for senior and junior officers also, was the Police Complaints Authority. Now, the police constantly tell us that what is this Police Complaints Authority? We are accountable to the judiciary, we are accountable to our internal systems, we are accountable to the National and the State Human Rights Commissions, to the STSC Commission and every other commission. Now you want to bring in a Police Complaints Authority. We reply that the Police Complaints Authority will be a specialist body, and anyway these systems, your internal system, etc., is not working, and therefore we want to create a new and specialist system which will bring year-on-year improvements. So the system is holistic, but there's a lot of resistance to it.
If you're already delivering with integrity, then people will come to you. They'll not go to the complaint authority because they'll trust you, because they know you will give them a redressal. First of all, it will be minimized complaints because you're delivering, you're trusted, and therefore people will not go anywhere else, but they know that you're accessible and the department is going to deliver. And therefore this becomes a little redundant. Those who are determined not to do it, authority or no authority, they have a way to get out of it. When we set up such authorities or complaint authorities, they are set up with such minimal resources that they don't deliver. It becomes another white elephant and an expenditure on the government, because you know what they're going to do? They don't have the mobility and the resources, so they're going to depend on your report. So I have a way to manage it. If I'm corrupt, I'll manage it. If I'm honest, it's anyway not going to come to you. That's the point.
Kiran, you yourself was part of the Soli Sorabji committee that was drafting the Model Police Act.
That's right.
That committee itself asked for the setup of this Police Complaints Authority, and the setup of that whole model was much more detailed.
Yes.
I think the Supreme Court, when it gave its judgment on the Complaints Authority, diluted it to some extent.
Yes.
But there is a lot of debate going on whether a police officer serving or retired should be on this Complaints Authority, because after all it then becomes a police officer judging another police officer. So the police are constantly saying, and some states where they have set up these complaints authorities, they have got a serving police officer on a complaints authority.
Serving?
A serving police officer of at the state level of the rank of an ADG and at the district level of the rank of an SP. Now those are powerful people, and it basically also goes against the principle of natural justice.
When you put in a serving officer, you're just creating a new post, maybe. So I would think that but having a retired officer would not be a bad idea, because you do need a little police insight input as well. But you're not the only person who's deciding, you're a part of an authority. So having police inputs, but from a non-serving officer who's retired, is a better option than having an army officer. That I think. But having a serving officer almost means creating positions and posts.
As you know, we've been working on police reform for a long time.
Yeah.
And a small part of our work also actually means taking some of the cases of police torture, custodial death, or illegal detention to court. We've done that in some instances, and the biggest barrier we face is this big problem of section 197. I think 197 explains it all. You just don't manage to get the accountability. Now, a lot of civil society organizations for a long time, and the Law Commission reports, have argued that in some instances 197 should be done away with. And we sincerely believe that if you want to get the accountability, this biggest barrier to accountability should go.
See, if you talk about 197, means prior sanction of the government before you can prosecute a particular police officer, right? If you ask me, if you did not have 197, I would have been prosecuted any number of times. So if you're asking me, 197 protected me for all my bona fide actions. Where I had to tear gas, I had to lathi charge, I had to open fire, but I had to save government life and property. But for 197, I would have been in the lock all my life. It gives you one little thing to hang on to, that if I have a bona fide clear action, I could be protected. On the other hand, you also have very corrupt officers who amassed wealth, who violated the law, but also abused the 197 protection. So the point, I don't know, I don't think the answer lies in removing the 197 protection. Answer again lies in appropriate, correct use of 197. But because if you remove it completely, then you are making, it's like throwing police officers, even bona fide and honest, to the wolves. And there are lots of wolves also in society who will be after the remaining honest. So if you want to still save the remaining honest, then you must have this law. But still, you have complaint authority, you have the Human Rights Commission, you have the RTI, you have the public interest petition litigation. Use those tools.
I hear you, Kiran. I hear you. But I think that what people are completely exhausted by and frustrated by, and therefore you are seeing now immediate public agitation against police people. I mean, even genuinely innocent police people, where a whole mob will go at the slightest thing and burn down a whole police station, is because of the bad and wrong use of this protection. Of course, the discretion to use or not to use that protection lies with the government.
Yeah.
But because it has protected so many people, so many high profile people that you see on television every day, and that there is no recourse. So that is something to do with the larger system. I appreciate that. But the dilemma is, we need legislation, or we need pronouncements of sufficient weight coming from government, not coming from the judiciary alone, to say that this 197 protection, or the discretion that it gives government, will not ever be used where there are things like death in custody, extrajudicial killings, but that there will be standard operating procedures which, if they have been breached, there will be no question of protection.
There are too few women police in the force right now, and even lesser diversity. Looking at the culture of the police, it's currently very macho. Do you think having more women in policing would change that culture, having be a more sensitive force?
It's a fact. Policing in India is totally a man's world. That's true. But there are many more women in the Indian police service joining since 72, which is a good thing. I think the real key challenge would be, how do these perform? Because that is which will spread the word around, whether they really make the difference. And their performance means the courage to take on corrupt leadership. Not only how they serve the poor, but the courage to take on the corrupt leadership at any level, within the department or outside the department. I think that test is yet to be passed. And that will set the future for the place which women policing will create for themselves.
But don't you think currently the environment is such within the whole force that doesn't allow that voice of the woman to come out at all?
If you're ready to move on with your bag and baggage, I think you can take on the system. It provides you enough opportunities to prove your missionary zeal.
Kiran, everybody sees you as an inspirational woman who, outside of the police as well as within the police, upheld a certain kind of courage and built yourself a certain kind of image, which many young people follow. You are in many ways an icon to many, many young people. So how did you come to be in the police? Because nowadays you've got the modern woman who thinks she can do everything, but when perhaps you were slightly younger, it wasn't quite that way. So how did you come into the police? Who encouraged you, and what did you find most difficult?
You see, when I was growing up, the world had opened up for me. I belonged to a world of sports, which was at its height. I ended up being a national tennis champion, then I won the Asian tennis title. At the age of 16 and 21, I was at the top of the academic world as masters in political science, topping the university. My parents were visionaries, believed in the power of the person, power of one, man or a woman didn't matter. So I think I owe it to my upbringing, the kind of quality education I got, the opportunities which opened up for me, and the way I respected those opportunities. I think you may belong to any generation. You have this as a package. You get opportunities and you have this as your genes, and you're determined to use your opportunities for a higher purpose. When I was growing up, I had a higher purpose. And my higher purpose was to grow up to serve my country. I had a scholarship waiting from British Columbia University to do a PhD. I rejected that and took the service examination. I had a higher purpose. And I continued to serve the higher purpose. It didn't lead me. So mine is not a one-off issue. I think anybody who gets these opportunities or creates opportunities and lives for a higher purpose and then remains courageous and never deviate from the path, you can have any number.
We have now the beginnings of a push for police reform. I mentioned to you, the Congress manifesto says it, Supreme Court has said it, some states are starting to legislate, others are beginning to dialogue with civil society on it. We get a lot of feedback from serving police officers. Sometimes they don't want their head above the radar, but there is a kind of thirst. And as far as the public is concerned, there is an enormous thirst. So, given all that, we seem to be at the cusp. Take this opportunity, how? Or lose this opportunity completely. So if I was asking for your leadership, how do I take this opportunity forward? What would you say, both in terms of what you should be telling others to do and in terms of your own contribution?
Since we talked so much about the Supreme Court judgment, I think at step one, which is doable, is how do we create an environment and a sense of urgency that the apex court intervenes and gets its judgment implemented in letter and spirit. I think that's the first challenge.
You're putting a lot of emphasis on the apex court.
Absolutely.
And I can understand why. But at the same time, there is nothing stopping today's police leadership and today's government from doing the right thing.
In the current environment, there has to be a fear of getting caught in the act. Now, unless you have evidence of getting caught in the act, you continue to say, I've done it, there's nothing wrong. So at the moment, there's only one fear of accountability left, is before the Supreme Court. Nothing else matters. Now the question is how? How do we create that kind of public opinion pressure, where the Supreme Court truly gets the sense of urgency and feels the heat that it must deliver? That's the beginning of reform within the department, because that's systemic reform. But there's just so much to do. But that begins with the leadership, and it begins with the focus, right? And so I think that's number one. Secondly, I think the Ministry of Law and Ministry of Home must work together on police reforms, because Ministry of Law means expeditious justice, and Ministry of Home means right kind of police leadership. I think between Ministry of Justice, Law and Ministry of Home, I think we need to say we need a rule of law. So the apex court for its judgment, and secondly, judicial reforms with police reforms will only ensure the rule of law which we are all looking for.